everybody, welcome to another StitchyTube-torial. It's like a tutorial, but it's got tube at the front. Today we're going to be talking about how to picture frame your needlework, and this is mainly going to be for counted work. I mean, a lot of these tips would work for needlepoint too, but framing needlepoint is a little bit different than framing cross stitch. So today we're going to talk about how to kind of prepare your piece and pick out your materials and get ready for the process of framing. And then the next tutorial is going to be about how to stretch your needlework. So stay tuned for that. This is kind of step one in the process of framing your needlework. And I think that even if you don't use all of these tips, it may give you just some appreciation for the things that framers have to do. And hopefully you have a good local frame shop. Most communities have frame shops, and I tend to use local frame shops. Michael's and Hobby Lobby have frame shops too. I have a local, kind of small business frame shop that I really enjoy, and they do a great job and their prices are really good, and so that's what I tend to use. But the trick is just, find a framer that you trust and that you like, and then, go ahead and stick with that framer. So we're going to start by talking about choosing your fabric. So this is even before you get started stitching. And I know one of the common questions that people have is, how big do I need to cut my fabric? And a lot of people say, oh, I like to have 3 or 4 inches on every side so that my framer has a lot of fabric to work with. You don't need that much fabric really to frame. It can be nice. It's not necessary. I have framed pieces, not my own, but I remember once framing a piece where a woman brought it in and she had stitched it. I mean, it was maybe 3/8 of an inch or a 1/2 inch room, and we made it work. And so the kind of allowance that I usually give is like a 2.5 inches on every side. So however big the piece is going to be, I add a total of 5 inches to each measurement. So if it's going to be a 5-inch wide piece, I cut the fabric 10. If it's going to be a 10-inch tall piece, I add another 5, and that's 15. And that's how big you cut the piece. Make sure that you get your piece, fairly centered. But again, it's not critical that every side be exactly the same size. One of the tricks you can use if you've cut your fabric too small is you can actually just take fabric that you've got, left over from a quilting project, even muslin works, and just use your sewing machine and sew a strip onto the side. And that gives you extra fabric for stretching it around your foam core. And so, don't feel like you have to add 3 or 4 inches to every side to help your framer. Even if they're matting your piece, there are ways to, get around having a whole bunch of extra fabric. Like I said, you can add strips of fabric to each side, and then it stretches just as well. And it saves money because, linen, especially if you're stitching on linen or hand-dyed fabrics, it can get to be very expensive. And so adding that extra, 8 inches across and 8 inches up and down really can add to your expense, and it just isn't necessary. Okay, and then once you've stitched your piece, then people will often ask, should I wash my piece? And I wash some pieces and don't wash others. You do have to be careful. Navy thread, red threads, and black, any of those really dark colors, can have a tendency to bleed. And so if you've got a piece that's bleeding, soak it and soak it and soak it and soak it until the bleeding stops, because once it dries, wherever that's bled, it has set, and it's pretty much impossible to get out. So I have washed silks, I have washed overdyed threads. I haven't had a ton of problems with bleeding. A lot of the threads used to be color fast, and then they weren't anymore, and now a lot of them say that they're color fast again. Unless you really feel like you've worked on a piece for such a long time that it's kind of dirty, or you were eating Cheetos while you were stitching, you can wash it, but just beware that you may have some bleeding. Silks are pretty strong fibers. When I wash my fabric with needlework on it, I typically use just a little bit of gentle shampoo. Baby shampoo works great. A little bit of dish detergent, just a little drop, lukewarm water, swish it around, don't wring it. Swish it and swish it, and you'll see some dirt come out of there. And then just kind of pat the water out of it, set it out on a towel to dry, and give it a good iron. I iron usually with the steam setting, and I often use the spray spritz of the water to really get my piece nice and flat. And again, if you're using steam, you do have to be careful because it is possible that some of your threads would bleed. Don't feel like you have to get absolutely every single wrinkle out of your fabric before you stretch it, because a lot of times the process of stretching will pull those wrinkles out. But you know, linen tends to have a lot of wrinkles, and so giving it an iron does really help. You'll find too that if you use like a hoop or something else that left creases on your fabrics, washing it and then giving it an iron really does pull a lot of those out. But don't worry too much. Stretching will pull a lot of the wrinkles out. Okay, so you've stitched your piece, you've cleaned your piece, and now you're on the way to the framer. And so the first thing you need to do is choose a frame. And we'll talk about matting here in a minute. But the first thing that I want to talk about is wide versus skinny frames. I love wide frames on needlework typically because I don't mat a lot of my needlework. And I feel that when you choose a wide frame, you're matting it and framing it at the same time because you're giving it a lot of color on each side and giving it more presence on the wall. So one of the examples that I'm going to use this week with my tutorial is a little piece by Barbara Anna Designs called, I think, Funky Bird. Ta-da! And there he is, and he's real cute. And the frame that I picked out for him is pretty wide. And it's got kind of a cool, it almost looks burned. I was saying at the frame shop, isn't it funny now we wore like torn jeans and we have frames that look like they've been, you know, stored in a barn for a couple decades, and we think it's really cool. People from 100 years ago would think we were crazy. But anyway, so this is the frame that I picked out. I think the tendency for a lot of stitchers is to think, okay, my piece is small, so I need a small frame. Not true. Doing a nice big wide frame gives it presence on the wall. Your piece, if it's little, is going to need a little help to stand out on your wall. So if you pick a really skinny frame, it's just going to look really small and kind of insignificant. So wide frames, to me, that's a really cool thing to do. Another thing to make sure that you get is this here is called your rabbet, the little lip that hangs out over the back of the frame. You want to make sure that the rabbet is deep enough to accommodate whatever it is you're going to put in there. So if you're going to get mats or you're going to get glass, you're going to have foam core in there for stretching. If you have spacers, the frame needs to be deep enough to hold everything. Now you can cheat, and there are ways to affix your frame in the back where, you know, if you had glass and a double mat and your foam core and, you know, backing and everything, and it got so it's kind of stuck out a little bit, you can make it so that you can get it in there with some little kind of brackets that you put on the back. But then your piece, you know, from the side, it's going to be lumpy and it's going to hang out from the wall a little way. And it works. It totally works. So if you really have to make a frame work, that does work. But just be aware that giving yourself that extra space really does help. Sometimes stitchers will go to a craft store or a thrift store and they'll find a frame that was made for holding photographs. So like if you go, you know, to Hobby Lobby or TJ Maxx or whatever, you see the frames that are standing up with an easel on the back. Those frames are made for photographs. And a photograph is thin like a piece of paper. And so the depth here of a frame like that is usually almost nothing. And so if you have to try to squish needlework and foam core at the very least inside there, you're really going to be in trouble. Again, there are ways to scoot around it and get it to be in there, but just be aware that if you're picking out a frame and you pick out one made for photographs, that you're not going to really have a lot of space inside the frame to hold everything that needs to go in there. Think about, you know, style and color when you're choosing frames. With a piece like this, to me, it was a no-brainer to go with a dark color. I just think it kind of goes with the primitive kind of style of it. But, you know, you know me, I don't like rules. So pick a frame that you like. I think sometimes, especially if you go to a new frame shop, sometimes framers want to be helpful and you pick a frame out that you like, that you think looks nice. And they may say, oh, you know, I don't really think that color works on there. Well, that's their opinion, right? They're not going to be the ones that look at it every day. And you may have a totally different sense of taste than they do. You know, you may like things really primitive. They may like things very formal. So stick to your guns. If you find a frame that you like and they advise against it, you can listen to what they have to say, but you're the customer. And so you can just say, oh, thank you so much for your suggestion, but this is the frame that I want. This gives me exactly the look that I want. Thank you. Now, if they have some reason, like you're picking a frame made out of a very lightweight wood and it's a really, really huge piece and they don't think it's going to hold together. But if it's just like they think, oh, I think this other color looks nicer, it's your piece. We don't all wear the same clothes. We're not all going to frame our pieces the same way. You can ask your framer about pricing on frames, and sometimes you may be surprised. I think everybody automatically thinks like, oh, picture framing is expensive, and it can be. It definitely can be expensive, but you can go into it with a budget and say, look, I didn't put that much time into this piece. This is kind of what I'm thinking. Or maybe it's like, oh, I spent a year stitching this. Let's go full blast on this one. But you can just say, like, they may show you a frame. They may show you a frame, and you may think like, oh, that's really nice, and then ask them like, well, how much would that frame be? And they can figure it out very quickly. If it's too much, say, I was really hoping to keep it down a little bit. Is there anything that you have that's similar that would be less expensive? Sometimes they're going to have a frame that's almost just exactly the same, and it's made by a different company, and it's really a lot cheaper. And so, definitely let them know what your budget is and what you're looking for within reason. Obviously, you're not going to get a $3 frame at a custom frame shop, but, they can definitely help you out. They really run a wide range on what their prices are. And sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes I look at a frame, and my frame shop has the price per foot on the back, per foot of frame. And sometimes I think, oh, I like that frame, but that's probably really expensive. And I flip it over, I'm like, oh, geez, that's really a cheap frame. And sometimes vice versa. You think something's going to be inexpensive, and it's really expensive. A lot of times it just depends on the company that makes the frame and where they're getting it from. So ready-made frames can be a little bit tricky. And ready-made frames, you'll see them at a lot of craft stores where they just have open back frames hanging for sale. Those are, again, often made to accommodate photographs or prints that come in standard sizes. So like everybody knows, 8x10, 9x12, 5x7, 11x14 is a standard size. And so then the problem gets to be your needlework is probably not a standard size. And so you can do different things like add or subtract bits from the piece, especially if you're doing a sampler, to make it fit a standard size if you'd like. You can also have mats cut to make your piece fit in there. I think a lot of times when you do that, though, it looks cobbled together, where it's like the mat has to be really wide on the top and bottom and really skinny on the sides to make your piece fit. And to me, it looks like that was kind of cobbled together. I like, if you watch Priscilla and Chelsea on FlossTube here, they do some really cool things with framing where they add pieces of fabric or extra things in with their framing, and that makes it look really custom, even though they're kind of cheating and using frames that they found. And it's really great. And so, definitely take a look at their channel. Every week they show pieces that they've done, and they've got some really clever finishing ideas on that. Look definitely for oopsie frames at your frame shop, and thrift shops and garage sales. You can find really great deals on frames, and even if you don't have anything that's going to fit right now, in the future you might. And so if you're paying 50 cents or $2 for a frame, put it in your attic, put it in your closet, hang on to it. Look for frames that you like, that are kind of your style. Spray paint them black, spray paint them cream, whatever to go with what you're doing. You can even paint them with acrylic paints. Frame shops have mistakes. So, and this is Hobby Lobby, any of the frame shops are going to have frames where they ordered something in for somebody, they ordered it the wrong size, the color didn't match, they ordered the wrong frame, whatever. They end up, as a frame shop, you end up with mistakes. And a lot of times they'll have like a little hook or something somewhere, or a couple times a year maybe they'll bring those frames out and just sell them at really deeply discounted prices. I love looking through those because you can get some really great frames for a really inexpensive price to frame your needlework with. Please be aware that your frame colors may differ. Just like our linens, our hand-dyed fabrics, every batch can be a little different. It's the same with frames. So if you're getting a wood frame, each wood is going to take stain a little bit differently, and so there can be small variations from the sample to how the frame actually comes in. But you can get frames really cut to size. So like sometimes I have a piece where it's like, okay, I want this framed all the way up to the edge. They can do that. You know, so don't feel like you have to have margins or anything like that. You do need to think about too how much space you like between your piece and the frame. I like things framed really tight, and you can see over this shoulder here are two antique samplers, and they're framed right up to the edge, which is historically how they did it. They just framed things right up to the edge, and I like that. I like things to be really tight, but that's a personal preference. Do remember that when you're picking out a frame, this rabbet is going to cover up 1/4 of an inch on each side. So when they're measuring, if you say like, I want, you know, an inch showing all the way around, they're going to have to add 1/4 inch here and 1/4 inch here. So they're actually adding 1.5 inches to the measurement of your piece. Okay. All right, let's talk about matting for a little bit. I don't really mat anything anymore. I just don't. I used to, back in the 80s and 90s, I used to mat my pieces, and matting is just kind of it's a really thick paper that they cut with a bevel to go around your piece. And there are a few reasons I don't mat anymore. One is I kind of feel like when you choose matting colors, you're picking, okay, so a frame is kind of forever. A lot of times you pick a neutral frame. And then it's kind of like a couch, okay? So you pick out a neutral couch, and then you pick out throw pillows, and you might pick like magenta because you're all into magenta that year. In 3 years, you're gonna be like, I'm sick of magenta, right? And it's kind of the same with framing, where you pick a frame, and then you kind of tend to pick a mat that's a color that's kind of current then, or something you're kind of feeling the vibe of right then. And then 10 years down the line, the color that you've picked, not only has it faded some, but it's just kind of ends up making the piece look dated. You know, like if I framed something in a mauve frame, you know, or country blue, you'd say like, oh, that's from, you know, this decade or whatever. So sometimes it really just dates your piece to have a mat on there. The other thing is that it adds considerably to your expense to add a mat, because people think like, oh, the mat's only $15 or however much it is. Okay, so the mat is only $15, but when you make a piece bigger, you've made the foam core bigger, you've had to make the frame bigger, you've made the piece of glass bigger. If you're having them do the stretching for you, you've added to the size that they're going to stretch, and so it exponentially makes your piece much more expensive to frame. It doesn't mean you should never mat. If you like matting, you should do it. Like I said, no rules, so make sure that you're doing things the way you like to do them. Just be aware that matting really is quite a large expense. You do want to make sure to pick out acid-free matting, and I think most matting really nowadays is acid-free. I started picture framing back in 1986 at age 15, right before my 16th birthday, for a chain called The Great Frame Up, where we cut the materials and we taught people how to do the framing themselves. And back then, acid-free mats were very new, and so there were only a few colors, and it was, you know, like cream and tan and pale blue, and there were like 10 colors or something. And the mats that we were using were full of acid, not acid-free, but full of acid. And so the bevels, sometimes when we were cutting a mat and would cut a bevel in the mat, an actual chunk of wood would fall out of the bevel. A lot of these mats, if you see them now in thrift shops or even at your home, you framed things back in the 80s, you'll see that the core of this mat, the bevel, is going to look really like yellow, orange, not good. So if you have a piece that you matted a long time ago and you're thinking, oh gosh, that looks so 1992, take it and just get a new mat cut. You know, maybe get something neutral, or maybe get a color that's, you know, current now, or even consider just reframing it entirely. But sometimes just refreshing the mat on an old piece will really kind of just brighten it up and make it look new again. Okay, so that's what I'm going to say about mats. Now we're going to talk about sticky board and foam core and the stretching materials. A lot of people now are using sticky boards to attach their needlework for framing or for finishing. I don't have anything against sticky boards. They've been around for a long time. They're made a lot better now than they used to be. There used to be a sticky foam board, and that stuff was terrible because it would dry out and rot eventually, and it would just all turn to powder and then sink to the bottom. And so I remember pulling pieces apart that you would pull it apart and there just would be all this like brown, foamy, dried particles inside. It was just gross. I'm not sure that they even make that anymore. So sticky board is fine if you want to use it. A lot of frame shops aren't going to have that option available, but you can find sticky board at different craft supply stores and online, I'm sure. It's not anything I use, but it's just because I stretch on foam core, and I'll show you how to do that next video, and so you'll know how to do that. When you pick out your foam core, make sure that the frame shop knows that you want acid-free. And you can tell the difference between acid-free and acid, I guess. The acid-free is going to be kind of a matte, slightly creamier color. And regular foam core is going to be shiny and kind of more slick and whiter. And the acid-free is just going to protect your needlework for the long term. If you have pieces from the past that you framed and you're worried that maybe you didn't use the right framing technique, you can definitely pull it apart and redo it. And again, watch my stretching video next time. Okay, so you want to make sure to cut your foam core to a size that's going to be easily accommodate the fabric being wrapped around it. So a lot of times frame shops are going to figure this out for you. If a piece is exactly 8 by 10, a lot of frame shops will cut the frame 8 1/8 by 10 1/8. And then that way there's kind of wiggle room for the glass to slide in or the mats to slide in, and then that'll give you room for your needlework to go in there too. So that's just kind of a tip for if you had your own frame and you were cutting your own foam core at home. Make sure that your foam core isn't like right up against the edge, because you're not going to be able to wrap your needlework around the sides of it. I also have them cut 2 extra pieces of mat board for me to take home with me before I stretch. And I forgot, so I've only got 1 today, but I'll stop by and get some more. And so I put a piece of mat board behind my piece and then the foam core. And that'll hide any little strings that might be hiding on the back. The back of this piece is actually pretty neat, but I did carry my thread from letter to letter. And so having a little bit of color behind, just that's kind of similar to the color of your fabric, will hide those sins. And so that's just a little sneaky tip from me to you. And then I have them cut another piece so that when I'm finishing it in the frame, I'll push and I'll show this next time, but then that way it covers up the edges of the needlework for when I'm pointing it into the frame. And so a lot of times they'll just do that out of scraps or whatever and just tell me you want a similar color. Okay, let's talk about glass. I don't put glass on much. I have glass on any of my antiques just because I feel like it protects them from cat hair and dirt and whatever. But I feel like you see your needlework a lot better when there's no glass on it. And this even goes for the models that I take to market. The stitches look more vibrant and more colorful, and you can really see the textures. So that's just a personal preference of mine. Does it mean that glass is wrong and you should never use glass? No. I have glass on some pieces, and I remember, quite a few years ago, I had a Mary Engelbreit piece that was a Santa that I had stitched that took forever. I went through like 4 skeins of one color for the border. It was crazy. And I had it hanging, and Harrison, when he was little, had a Go-Gurt, one of those yogurts that come in like a tube, and I cut it for him, and he took it and went like that, and yogurt went everywhere, and it splashed on the piece. So I took that, I had to take it apart, clean it, and took it to the frame shop and had them put glass on it. And I actually was just thinking about it today when I was making my notes here, and I'll probably take it apart and take the glass back off. Anyway, so that's kind of funny. So, but glass is really up to you. There are going to be different types of glass. There's, the base cheapest type of glass is just regular glass. And then there's, they'll maybe have like a non-glare option, which will cut down on reflections. And then there may be like museum quality glass, which is going to cut down on the UV rays and, the damage that you might get of sun on your piece. And it really, also just makes it really easy to see your piece. Some of the glass now is just amazing, where it just almost looks like there isn't even glass on it. And that's really cool too. So again, just if you're going to do glass, just, use your budget. I don't hang anything where direct sunshine is on it, even for just part of the day. Everything is kind of on interior walls, and that just kind of helps cut down on the fading that you're going to see. But you may also want to consider where your piece is hanging. So let's say you normally don't put glass on your piece. If you're going to hang a piece in a bathroom or like in a kitchen prep area or somewhere where you think, you know, it might see some, you know, just dirt and grime, go ahead and put glass on it. It'll protect it. You do want to make sure to use spacers. Like if you don't use a mat with your needlework, you're just doing glass, you have to use spacers. And this is what a spacer looks like. I have a tube of these here at home. You can probably find these online. But all it is a little acrylic, you know, kind of square line. And they come, I think, like 5 feet tall maybe, or 4 feet. And it's got a little peel off sticker on one side. And so when you cut your glass, you just use a wire clippers to clip it to the size you need, peel off the sticker and stick it to the edge of your glass, and then your needlework is held up off of the glass. So what happens sometimes is people get glass, but they get no spacer, no mat. So the glass is right up against the needlework. That's not the greatest thing to do. I mean, again, I don't believe in rules, but I'll tell you what can happen if you have glass on top of your needlework. Sometimes that glass is going to trap moisture between the needlework and the glass. And over time, it's hard on your fibers. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a fog on the inside of your glass. And you don't even realize it until you pull something apart. So if you have something with glass where the glass is flat on top of the needlework, if you take that apart and then hold the glass up, you can see a foggy outline of your entire piece, which is frightening. So, and you can clean that, and you can go to the frame shop and ask them to add spacers, so it's no big deal. But just be aware that having glass right on top of your needlework is not the best practice. If you do have pieces with glass on them, you want to be really careful cleaning those pieces. Because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, you know, I should run around and Windex the front of my framed pieces. First of all, I guess if you've gotten a special kind of glass, sometimes the frame shop will give you a little bottle of cleaning fluid if there's a special kind of cleaner used. So make sure that if you bought fancy glass that you've got the right kind of cleaner. But let's say it's just regular old glass or regular non-glare glass. Our tendency is to walk up to the piece on the wall, spray it, and wipe it. And what can happen is you spray it and the drips run down the frame and into the rabbet, and then they can leak back up into the matting, that little bit of moisture, and cause some waving and warping. And that's not the best thing, because you kind of ruin your mat. So the way that I clean things with glass is you take the frame, you can take it off the wall, you don't have to though, is I take a really good paper towel or like a flour sack towel or a really good paper towel, spritz it with your glass cleaner, and then so it's just kind of moist, not soaking wet, but just a little moist, and then wipe it that way, and clean your glass with the rag. So don't spray directly onto your frame. And that goes not only with needlework, with anything. If you've got framed prints and things in your house, spritz your paper towel or your rag, and then clean. Okay, so then the next question is probably going to be, are they going to stretch it or are you going to stretch it? And I'm sure a lot of you have the frame shop stretch it, which is totally fine. Ask them how they do it. Everybody's different. Most frame shops are either going to pin or lace. Pinning is where the piece is held onto the foam core by pushing pins into the side, and then the pins just stay in there. Lacing is when they pin it first and then stretch it around and basically lace it like a shoe, back and forth this way, and then back and forth this way to hold it on, and then a lot of times they'll pull those pins out. And lacing is like the fancy, best, coolest, neatest, most expensive way to have your needlework stretched. I don't lace. There are lacing tutorials here on YouTube, and I'm not going to do a lacing tutorial because I'm really not very good at it. I'm going to show you the pinning technique next time that I show you how to do stretching. But both techniques really are fine. If you get stainless steel pins, I've even used nickel pins, and I just don't see a lot of problems. The cool thing about pinning is that you can totally remove it. So you just pull all the pins out and your piece comes right off the foam core, and it's none the wiser. And lacing is the same way. You just cut the laces and pull your piece off and you're good to go. So those are both very good things to do. about, oh gosh, what, in like the mid 90s maybe? It got to be late 90s. It got to be real kind of trendy, at least where I was, to put padding under your needlework, to put like batting underneath so it was kind of poofy. And you could still do that, and I'm sure there are some people who like it. It's not my favorite thing, but it's an option if you're just kind of going for, you know, a different look. I guess if you felt like your back was really lumpy for some reason, you know, that you had a lot of knots back there. Sometimes if you get a piece of vintage needlework, it's just going to be lumpy. Putting a little padding behind it may make it kind of even out a little bit. And so stretching too, you may want to ask them, like, how much is it to have it stretched? And they may say, well, it's this much to pin it, it's this much to lace it. If they say they're going to vacuum mount it, don't do that. I have vacuum mounted needlework at a customer's request. She was advised it was not the best thing. It was cheaper. That's what she wanted. And vacuum mounting is using a vacuum press. It kind of looks like a giant flat suitcase. And you spray the foam core with an adhesive, or you lay down a sheet of adhesive that kind of looks like wax paper, and then heat and vacuum like sucks. And it's used mainly for posters to keep them from warping and waving. You can use it for needlework. It's not my favorite. Ask them how much it's going to be too, because sometimes, like there was one time I went to my local frame shop, and I have a great frame shop that's local that is cheap, and I was dropping it off and she was like, okay, blah, 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 here's how much it's going to be. I was like, oh, wait, is that to stretch it too? And she said, yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, just do it. Cause I was kind of in a hurry and I just knew they would take care of it. I do stretch most of my own stuff. It does save some money for me, but sometimes it's quite expensive. And so learning to stretch your own piece is not only convenient, but it can save you a lot of money in the long run too. But definitely talk to them about how they stretch and just ask them what the practices are and see if you like it or not. So then if you decide to stretch your own piece, you can totally do that. You can go to a frame shop and order just a frame and the foam core or whatever pieces you need, the mat, the glass, whatever, and say, I would like to do the stretching. And I've never had a frame shop question that or tell me no. You're the customer, so you can totally do that. You want to wait until the frame is built to stretch it. Don't let them cut you a piece of mat board right then and there and then take it home and stretch it and bring it back, because what may happen is the frame got cut, you know, slightly smaller, and now suddenly your piece won't fit in. So you want to make sure that the foam core fits into the frame with enough space left around it that you can put your fabric around the edges and that everything is going to fit. So wait until the frame is built, and then they'll call you, pick up the frame and the foam core and bring it all home. And I'll show this again next tutorial, but you really are going to use that frame to check your stretching, and it's going to help you see if your stretching is even and straight. So take the frame home with you. If you framed with matting, take the matting home with you too. Take it all. And again, that's going to help you center your piece, figure out if your lines are nice and even or not. And so everything can come home with you. Now you can then take it back and they can close it up for you. Some frame shops will have a closing fee, you know, of however much. And that includes, like, you know, hitting it with the brad gun and making it stay in the frame, putting paper on the back, putting a hanger on the back, and some bumpers on the back. I will show you how to do that next time so that you can do that at home. It is totally something you can do at home, and that's what I do, rather than run it back and have them do that little bit. But if you don't have the tools or the time, that is really something that you can, you know, even just sit there and wait for them to do it, because it literally takes just no time at all to do that. Okay, so that's all of that. Then let's say you need something quick. So you're taking your needlework and you waited till the last hour to stitch something, and you finished it at midnight and you need it for this weekend because it's your friend's birthday. Ask your frame shop if they have any frames that they stock that they can cut for you. Frame shops do order their frames in different ways, and one way that they can order frames is it's called chop. And that means that they call the frame company and say, we need a frame, this frame, you know, XYZ 123, and we need it 8 1/8 by 10 1/8. And then they will, at the frame company, will cut it to size, wrap it up in brown paper, and ship it to the frame shop exactly the size that they ordered. And the cool thing for the frame shop is it saves them waste. Frame shops can also order frames by length, which means they're just ordering, they'll call a company and say, we need frame XYZ123 and we need 15 feet. And so then they will get several sticks that they can then cut to sizes that they need. The benefit to the frame shop for ordering length is that it's cheaper per foot for them to order it in just sticks. And then the benefit to ordering it chop is the frame shop doesn't have to cut it, and they're only getting as much frame as they need. So they're getting exactly the size that they need, but it is more expensive for them to order it that way. And, you know, usually frame shops are going to pass expense on to you. And it varies. But anyway, my frame shop has some frames that they stock as length, and then a lot of it they order as chop. And usually it just takes a couple of days for them to get it in, which is really cool. But if you need something super quick, you can say, hey, you know, I'm so sorry I waited and I need this Saturday. Do you have anything in stock? And they'll say, okay, yeah, here. And they'll pull some samples from the wall and say, these are all things that we could, you know, cut for you right away. My local frame shop is really cool because they will cut it while you wait. And so now you can't leave. The rule is you can't leave. So if you want something cut to size, you just sit down with your phone and you play a couple of games of Words with Friends or whatever, and it takes them 20 minutes or whatever while they cut the frame and build it, and then they just hand it to you with the foam core and everything, and that's really, really cool. Not every frame shop is going to be that way, and a lot of frame shops these days are just going to order things chop, which means they're going to have to call somebody, get exactly what they need, and get it in. We always used to work with length back in the 80s and 90s. It just was, that's how we did things, and it just allows you to keep things in stock and really just, I don't know, like I said, it cut down on the price that we paid also. But so anyway, ask, and they may have, you know, they may have some oopsie frames where they're like, oh, you know what, I think we have this frame that we accidentally built. This might work just perfect. So just ask for help if you need something rushed. If you have frames at home that have been on the wall for a while that are looking kind of banged up and dinged up, it happens. You can touch those up. So they make wood markers, and I think you can get them typically at any, like, you know, Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever. You can find different wood markers. I've used Sharpies too, like black Sharpies work great on a dark frame if there's a little chip missing. Frame shops will also have putty, framing putty, which comes in little tins. It's nothing that you're really going to want to invest in. I think you can get different putties, again, at Lowe's or Home Depot. But if you've got a frame with like a little chunk missing and it really bugs you, take it to your local frame shop and say, hey, can you help me out with this? And they'll just go to the back and get their little tin of putty, and I don't know what they'll charge you, if anything. And, you know, help you just kind of touch it up so that the frame looks kind of just as good as new. And really be friends with your framer. Be friendly. They're great people. I don't know. I mean, I guess I've run into a few where I thought they were kind of particular and weird, but most framers are just the nicest people. It is not a high-paying job. It is a super fun job. There definitely are frustrations with it like anything else, but if you get to know your framer and they get to know you, you can just develop like this nice little rapport and this nice little friendship where it's, you know, they're kind of sometimes willing to do little favors for you. You know, be faithful, stick with the same frame shop. If you give them business, they're going to give you their best. And, you know, custom framing doesn't have to be such a nightmare for people. I think a lot of people in the stitching community have boxes of pieces. It's like, oh, I never got any of this framed. It's so expensive. It can be expensive. I sometimes get frames for like $15 or $20 for a custom frame that's really cool, and it just doesn't have to be that expensive. Keep your mind open. I think one of the cool things about FlossTube right now is that there are so many non-framing ideas for needlework, and that too can really cut down on the expense of finishing your needlework. Not everything has to hang on the wall. And so watch other YouTubers and what they're doing as far as finishing their pieces, because I think you can really get some great ideas, and then, you know, develop your own ideas, and, you know, just have fun with it. Have fun with the finishing. I think people dread that part of the process, but it's so fun to have a piece that now all of a sudden you can display. Okay, I think that's everything for right now. Like I said, next time I will be talking about how to stretch your needlework And I'm excited about that because I think you'll enjoy the process. It's a lot easier than you think it's going to be. And like I said, it can save you a lot of money and time. It's a great skill for any needleworker to know. You know, just like we know how to figure out the size of our fabric, and we know how to, you know, do different kinds of stitches. And if you really need to learn how to stretch, it's going to just, you know, be a great little tool in your mental repertoire to use with that craft that you love to do so much. So thanks so much for hanging out with me this time. I will be filming this next tutorial real soon, and you can learn a little bit more about picture framing. Thanks for checking in to my Stitchy Tube tutorial. Take care. Bye-bye.